Hello and welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to take you through the acquisition reports of Google Analytics. So this is where it can tell you where your traffic comes from before it arrives to your website. And we're going to cover channels, source medium, campaigns and referrals. And then we're going to go further into look at the Google Ads campaigns and how you can inspect and also analyze the performance of those. And also lastly, looking into your Google Search Console and looking at the performance of your organic search and what kinds of keywords people are searching for in Google. Just a small note, Google Analytics is always adding new features and new tools to the dashboard, so it's quite likely that after this video has been recorded and published, you will likely see some new features and tools that will be in the dashboard. So let's get started. Okay, to start off with, we've come into the dashboard here. We're using the Google Merchandise Store as the example, and we just go into the acquisition topic here and we open it up. And first of all, we're just going to go through the overview. So at a glance, we can see here we just have some dashboard segments here. We have the default channel grouping. You can make your own custom channel grouping, but we're not going to go into that into this video. And you can also look at your conversion here. So if you've got e-commerce conversion switched on, you will see that coming up as the default option, but you can change it to any other conversion goal that you've got here. So we've got some examples here showing registrations or engaged users or entered checkout. So you can change this, and then you can obviously filter that through the metrics that are coming up here. And so at a glance, this will tell you your top channels, and we're going to go more into channels very shortly. So it'll show you just a breakdown of those in a pie chart. And lastly, down the bottom here, you'll see direct, paid search. You'll see the performance here, but you'll see it in a pivot table where we have what we like to call the ABC. So that's acquisition, that's behavior metrics, and this is conversion metrics. So we can see it's quite obvious that direct channel is the best performing channel. And that's obvious because most of the people who come to this website come direct because they're like you and me, they're into their Google Analytics and they want to use this as a test site to analyze the data that's coming in it. And some of them end up making purchases, and that's quite likely. So just before we go ahead, we can actually change the data of the date here. So you pick a data range that you want. So we're just going to pick all of June all the way through to July 2021. We apply that here and we can see the data changes a little bit inside of here. So we're just going to get further into some of the more specific reports here where you can get a lot more insight out of your data. So we open up all traffic and we go to channels, and then we can see here the channel data coming through. We can see these dips coming in through quite regularly, and they time with the weekends because not many people access this store in the weekends because a lot of people use the Google merchandising site during work hours, and when it's weekends, we're not coming to the site, quite obviously. So going through here, we can see the default channel grouping. Now what that means is that this is the default channel grouping that Google sets. Based on its own machine learning and algorithms, it has determined where the traffic's coming from. So direct is people who directly type in the URL into the website, and paid search is paid search is your Google Ads campaigns really. So they're using your keywords and your paid campaigns to actually bring in the traffic. Display are your Google Ad Display Network ads. So they're your visual ads that you put on websites, usually carried through the Google AdSense network. And then we've got affiliates here, and that's another thing that we are not going to cover into detail here, but obviously if you have affiliate links going on, this is where they're going to come through. And also referral, that is other websites that basically refer to your website. Other is everything that it cannot track. So if you have other coming up as a really high amount of people coming in here, I would suggest you make a custom channel group because Google's algorithm or machine learning for auto tagging on here is not really working. And I would suggest you take advantage of the UTM tagging of source, medium, and campaign, and we're going to get into that in a bit more detail. But first, I just want to take you through the metrics in this table. These metrics in most of these acquisition reports remain pretty consistent. We can see the pivot table with the acquisition behavior and conversions. We can see here we've got goal 3 registrations. We picked that before when we were in the overview. We can change that back to e-commerce goals, and all the data will change accordingly. So we can see here that we have the users, new users, sessions, and then the bounce rate, which is an indication of engagement of your customers. Anything with a high bounce rate isn't really going to make you much revenue because people are bouncing, they're not doing anything, they're going into the website and they're leaving pretty much straight away. And you can see the average pages per session. So this behavior is really all your engagement metrics. And these are all basically how many people came to your website and from what channel. And then lastly, in conversions, this is where I think most of the more important data is, because this is what leads to revenue or value for your business. You can see here, right, very obviously that direct has brought in the most traffic and the most transactions and therefore the most revenue. And you can see it's also, well, it's not actually the highest conversion rate. You can see other is the highest conversion rate. And that's simply because we've got a low amount of users, but we've got quite a high number of transactions in relative to that number here. So these are some of the stats you can look at to gauge and benchmark the performance of your campaigns. So going into here, we can also change it into a pie graph. So this is kind of not that easy to read. We can look at the pie graph here and we can change it here. So it's quite obvious that direct is the majority of users coming to this website. So it might not be the most helpful metric here in this instance, but if your channels are bringing in quite a lot of traffic that looks very similar, you could put it into a pie chart, a bar chart like this, or even looking at the average and comparing it. So you can see here, these are all underperforming and this is performing the best. And these are all relative to each other. So you can see here we've got users, but we want to find out what the conversions are. So I want to look at the goal conversion rate. So we change that as our metric, and we can actually see other is performing the best because of the low number of users, but the high number of transactions that are relative to that. Although here we still have a pretty good one here for the direct channel. Let's go further into the source and medium. Now, before we keep going, you can actually go into that from here or into the separate report down in here. So if I wanted to change the dimension whilst I'm still in this report, I can go to source medium. And let's go back into our pivot table. And I can see all the information coming from source medium here. Acquisition, behavior, conversions, same groupings of metrics on the right hand side here, but the dimensions have changed. And you can change the dimensions. You can see it says primary dimension. You can change it and you can go for source on its own or medium on its own. So let's get into the source and medium reports because that's a bit more relevant here. We're not going to cover tree maps. I don't particularly find tree maps that helpful. It's more there to visualize how many channels, like the majority of your channels coming through. But you can do that with the graphs on the channels report. So, I mean, you can go and explore it, but it's not really that helpful, I don't find. So we go into source medium, and going further in, source is where your traffic came from, and the medium is how it got there. That's pretty fundamental to how we use the tracking or the UTM tags. So when you send out URLs into your paid media or your own media, you would put parameters into the web link that would tell Google where the customer came from. So if it's an email newsletter, the source would be newsletter and the medium would be email. And likewise for an SMS campaign, you might have one where the source is from a paid, like a print advertisement or TV, and you would put that in as the source, and then the medium would be SMS because that's the vehicle of how the traffic got to your website. So we can see on the left here, the breakdown here, we've got Google, and that's cost per click is the medium. And we've got partners is the source, affiliate is the medium, and so forth. If you wanted to put in a secondary dimension, which all the reports in Google come with this ability to insert a secondary dimension. So for a quick little look, we want to put in the campaign. So we type in campaign over here and it loads up, and then we can see the specific campaign that is matched here. So with your acquisition tagging or for your campaigns, you would have the three types of parameters. The source being one, the medium being the other, and the third being the campaign. There are other additional parameters you can use, such as content and term, and also Google Ads can do some of the auto tagging for you. Now, talking about Google Ads, we can see that some of these campaigns are coming directly from Google Ads. This is Google Ads doing the auto tagging for you, and you can see their Google cost per click, and this is the campaign name. When you set up a Google ad and you enter in all the information to run it, it will then create all the tagging for you. You don't need to worry about doing this to your links. Google will set it up for you. So if we look at this report, we can see again that direct is the best performing one outside of all these other channels, and the e-commerce conversion rate here is a nice healthy 3.44%, and it's bringing in around $306,000. You can see none of these other ones are really performing well, except we can see this data share promo here being a partner's affiliate, bringing in a little bit of money. And lastly, this not set. I should just make a special mention for this not set area. This means that it hasn't been tagged appropriately and Google doesn't know where it's coming from. It can't auto detect it. So this is something that you don't really want to see a lot of in your reports, because this just means that we don't know where the traffic came from. So if you have a lot in here and there's a high amount of revenue coming from it, you want to find out where that's coming from. So you want to look at the way you're tagging your links that you're sending out for your campaigns. Okay, so we go into referrals. Now we talked about the source and medium. One of the really high converters is referrals. So when someone refers to you, like an influencer or a blog or another website who looks to you as an industry leader in your domain, and you get a referral, you're likely to get a high conversion rate from them. And that's why Google Analytics has separated it out to be its own report. So for going into referrals, in this case, the Google store doesn't really have too many referrals coming in because it knows it gets a lot of direct traffic. But if you had other websites referencing you, you would see it coming through here. This one's really a false positive because this is actually coming from the Tag Assistant Google, which is something you put in the browser. This is your Tag Assistant up here actually, and somehow it's referring traffic to the website. But generally you would have a high conversion rate from my background and experience for referral links, and you can get them all separated out down here and you can see exactly which referral is performing the best out of all of them, so you know where you can actually kind of exploit that to get even more traffic and more revenue and conversions for your website. Okay, so I just want to go into campaigns. Campaigns is on its own section as well down here because it actually involves a lot more. There's a lot more to campaigns than what we see inside of here, but it is still relative because we talked about the campaigns being the third parameter inside of the Urchin or UTM tracking codes. So we go into campaigns and we can open that up, and I'm just going to open up all campaigns, and the campaign will be the primary dimension on the left hand side here. And we don't get to see the source or medium, but we can see campaign for paid and owned media. Now what I mean by paid media is obviously Google Ads, Google Display Network, Facebook ads, or anything like that that you've tagged as a paid advertisement. But you've also got things like your own media. So you might have your own Twitter, your own Facebook, and other channels that you own, and you might be publishing links and promotions through them using your own tagging system set up, and this is where you can see it. So in this particular instance, you can see the majority of these are all Google Ads campaigns that are auto tagged, because this kind of format is very much what Google Ads will do. This one here is likely not a Google Ads. If we want to make sure we want to see that, we can just add another secondary mention, and let's add source medium. You just type it in and you can select it, and here we go. We've got the partners affiliates being the source and medium. Now this is sort of like a reversal of what we did before. Before we went into the all traffic source medium, and then we added campaign as a secondary dimension. So it's really how you want to display the information. It's very flexible. The metrics on the right here pretty much stay the same. So we can see here the affiliate program got us a nice tidy sum of almost $200, and down the bottom here this Google pay-per-click or Google ad got us about $305. So let's go a bit further into some of the campaign reports you can see here. So we're going to look at our paid keywords under the campaigns here, and you know how I was talking before, we have paid keywords and then you can have also organic keywords. So these are the keywords that you are using in your ads. These are the ones that you've bidded for and you've paid because you're running a Google ad with these keywords. So you can actually look at the performance of how they're doing here. So what we're seeing here is a pattern where we can break down the performance of our Google ad campaigns into very granular levels. So we can see the overall campaign, and then we can see the keywords and how they're performing. So if we saw that a certain grouping of keywords was the best performing, we would then run more Google ads using those keywords, particularly if they match our campaign and what we're trying to sell. So in this instance, we don't really have too much good data that we can see here. They're all pretty normal. This one's getting quite a lot of users, and you know, the bounce rate is quite awful by all means, and the metrics here don't really tell us much. There's lots of zeros going on. There are some transactions, but we can't see them. So what's happening now is that we're getting everything ordered by the users, and that may not be something that we want to see. We want to see something ordered by the revenue instead, or even the conversion rate. So if I click on this column, it's going to reorder the column and show me what is actually converting the strongest. So we can see here we haven't had a lot of users, but they're clicking on it a lot and they're quite engaged. The bounce rate is very low. All of these kind of metrics correlate to each other. We can see they spend a long time on the page, and they also have a low bounce rate, and the conversion rate is quite high, and the revenue is coming in, even though it's only one transaction. But this might be something that we want to use more of, and likewise with these. So this is how you can actually sort with these columns to see, you know, bring the metrics to the surface that you want to see, because before we didn't really get anything. We just know which one brings in the most users, but those users are not engaged. They're not clicking. We want to find the ones that are engaged and are converting. Likewise, I can click on the bounce rate and I can find the highest bounce rate. These pages, there's something either wrong with them or people are totally not engaged at all. They are 100% not even looking, not even interacting, just leaving the website. And then we can switch it around to see the ones that they're most engaged with. I would hazard a guess that these are actually incorrect metrics. So you don't actually get 0% of bounce rate. I very much doubt that. That's probably something on Google's end. But if you're looking at something like we said before, 20% bounce rate, that's doing really well. So we'll move on to the actual organic keywords report after we've looked at the paid Google ads. Now there's nothing actually in here at the moment, so this report isn't probably the best example inside of the Google Analytics. And what we can do is a bit of a crossover here, because when we link up the Google Search Console into Google Analytics, we can actually see the Google organic keywords coming through in the reports. So that might be why this report isn't that particularly useful. So we're just going to move past. But what it means is that once the data is coming in, it will send the organic keywords that people use to come to your website, and what are the top converters. What are the keywords that people use on Google search that actually gets them to the page that they want to use and make a conversion, make a purchase or whatever. Furthermore, we'll go into the cost analysis. And this one actually tells us some pretty interesting information, very useful for the digital marketers out there. We can see the default metrics are clicks versus cost. So this will find us a lot of very useful information for advertising metrics. So scrolling down here, we can see the source medium. Again, we could put the campaign as a secondary dimension if we want here as well, or any other valid dimension that we can use. Not every dimension that you can use here is going to be valid, so you need to experiment a bit, but I would probably use the dimensions that are already available in acquisition reports. So just looking in here, we can see that direct none is coming through, and all the metrics seem to be the same at the start, but then we get something very interesting. Unlike the other reports we looked at before, we can see the impressions, the clicks, and the cost, and going further into it, we can see the click-through rate, the cost per click, and what is this one here? This one's revenue per click. And lastly, one of the most important metrics, your return on advertising spend. This is a key metric for the advertisers to understand how well their ad is performing, how much it's returning. It's actually better than the return on investment. It's a more accurate measure of performance for your advertising. So we can see here that this campaign, the Google one, that cost per click, this particular source medium, is returning the best. And that's quite obvious, because this is actually the source medium for your Google cost per click. Of course it's performing the best. Other ones probably won't perform as good as that. So you can see here it's the only kind of row of data that's worth looking at. So let's dig in a bit deeper. Let's open up the campaigns as a secondary dimension like I mentioned earlier. And then we can look at some of the more interesting data inside of here. So the campaigns we have here, and we can analyze these on their own, and we can see that the cost per click, we can see the metrics. Not all of them are performing very well, but say I want to find the best ROAS. I'm going to click on that. And then I can see here, this particular campaign didn't get too much reach, but it got a lot of impressions and a lot of click-through rate and things like this. So this is a very good performing Google ad. If we were able to target more users, we would do a lot better with this ad. Unlike this one actually has a lot of users, but no clicks. Not even impressions, completely dead. But that's pretty obvious because that's direct none. That's not even a campaign. So that's always going to come up like that. You've got to look for the ones that you're actually using as a marketing campaign. So all the Google ones here are obviously campaigns, and we're looking at the metrics and we can see that information. If we want to look at that information in a bit more detail in a graph, we could pull it up over here and look it into as a bar chart. That one by far is performing the best in users, but we want to change that. Let's look at the clicks. Okay, so we can see the performance of the clicks. Now you'll notice it doesn't have all the metrics that we saw before in that pivot table. So that's one of the shortcomings here of this feature in Google. We only got some of the metrics here, whereas actually, I speak a lie. In this one, we only had a select metrics here, but if we go into this benchmark one, we can actually access more of them. So if I want to see the cost per click, I can see this one actually cost the least per click, so that's done pretty well. If I want to measure to the ROAS, I can see this metric. All of these aren't performing very well at all. Just before we leave this report, I'm just going to remind you about this metric or this visualization at the top here, clicks versus cost. We look at these and we can change these obviously to be other dimensions like the click-through rate or the ROAS, but they'll look at your data over time and it's aggregated as well unless you're using segments. So it's looking at all your campaigns and seeing the performance. Obviously you're looking for trends or patterns here. If there's a sudden dip, you need to know why that's happening, or if there's a sudden increase, perhaps that needs further investigation to understand why. So I'm going to look at the clicks versus the ROAS instead of the cost, and we can just do that here. And we can see the ROAS is quite up and down. So the campaigns are probably on and off quite a lot here. So if that's consistent with the way that you're doing your marketing, that's a good way to check the performance, or I suppose the heartbeat of what you're doing with your campaign management. So we're going to go and break down to more information about the Google Ads. Now this is only possible if you link your Google Ads to your Google Analytics. If you haven't done that already, you won't be able to see these reports. We're not going to cover how to link your Google Ads into your Google Analytics in this video, but this just assumes you've already been able to get it to work and you've linked to a particular Google Ads account through your Google Analytics. So we're looking at, you can actually link multiple accounts to Google Analytics, and that's best done through a managed account in Google Ads or the MCC account. So first of all, we're going to go into the account section, and if you're scrolling down, we can see some of those same metrics we saw before with the cost per click, users, sessions, bounce rates, and also revenue. So you see there's a pretty common trend of the metrics in these reports and what's important to, or what Google believes is important to you digital marketers. So we can see the account here. There's only one account linked. If you have multiple Google Ads accounts linked, you can actually see which one's the best performer here. Not set is simply information that cannot be, basically it's information that it doesn't know about. It's maybe an ad account that's running that it cannot be tracked. Generally you want to just ignore it. It will come up in some of the reports, but it's likely erroneous data. So we're looking at this and we can see that the clicks that we've got, the cost of how much it costs to run the campaigns during the time period we've specified being June and July, and we can see the cost per click. But then what we see here is that's 27,393, and what's the revenue? So that didn't bring in much revenue at all. If you're looking at this underperformed quite a lot. The bounce rate is quite high, so there's probably something wrong with this. Although I got to admit, Google Merchandise Store, they're probably running these campaigns just to get data in there to show you. They're probably not really paying attention to the trends or really trying to use the data to improve or optimize their campaigns. You don't want to see these kind of information in your own dashboard, basically. So we're going further into the actual campaigns, and some of this data will look familiar because we covered it in early reports. So this little icon means it's a Google ad campaign next to it, and we can see the number that was assigned to it, and we can see the campaign ID. And you see this information coming up here looks very similar to the campaign naming that you saw in those earlier reports. And that's because it is. This is the auto tagging that takes place. So we see again the clicks, the cost per click, and all these other metrics again. So then we can look at the performance of these reports, and we can see this one they spent about $6,000, and it hasn't pulled back anything. The bounce rate's 100%. So that's a terrible campaign. You really don't want to see that at all. Let's look at the one that brought in the most revenue. So I'm going to click on the revenue column here. Actually, you might want to do something. If this happens to you and you need a little side scrolling because it's not wide enough, you can just close the sidebar over here and look at it in the full screen. So we can see here that this brought in the most revenue, and how much did we spend on it? Nothing. That's fantastic. That's the best way. But this is actually not probably the correct data. So this brought in revenue, but it was no clicks, no costs. I wouldn't trust this kind of data. Again, you're looking at data that kind of makes sense. So you look at this one, clicks, cost, and then the revenue. Again, this is a loss-making one because you spent more than it brought in. So in this example, probably not the best kind of data, but you want to be analyzing it like a marketer to understand that your return on investment, if you got a higher revenue than your actual cost outlay, that your ad is performing good. And the more that you can bring in on revenue and make a profit, obviously the better it will do. And you can look at other things in link with it, like say the e-commerce conversion rate and the number of transactions as well. So I want to just go through into the keywords of your Google Ads here. So this is in the Google Ads section again. We looked at the campaigns. Now we're looking at the performance of the particular keywords in here. So we can see a list of all the keywords denoted with a little plus symbol next to them here. That really just shows, that also shows the space between the words as well as the start. Plus symbol represents a space because you can see these ones don't have it, but these ones do. So again, the metrics pretty all similar that we've seen before. I'm not going to cover them in detail again, but you can analyze this to see what are your best performing keywords so you can make more Google ad campaigns with the particular keywords that perform and also drive customers to the traffic or to the pages you want them to. So if we want to see what's the best performing here, obviously we could look at the revenue. So I want to see this one. This is about $5,000 here. Google Merchandise Store, that was the best performing keywords out of this analysis. And that's pretty obvious because that's exactly what this store is about. When people want to search for this, they're going to likely type in Google Merchandise Store. So we can see some of the other ones here. They didn't get much data. Obviously your data will look a lot different from this. So you want to look at the revenue, you will look at the transactions and the e-commerce conversion rate, and also some of your outlay, some of your costs. Is it effective? If you're comparing your outputs, if you're comparing your revenue with how much it costs, you're going to see how effective, how well it is. You don't see the ROAS metric on this, but you can figure it out yourself. So we're going to go further into the search queries, and the search queries is the keywords you saw here in the campaigns. Now you're going to see some of the some of the search queries that customers put into Google and then ended up with your Google ad campaign using the keywords or the linkage to it. So this is what people have typed in, and they can type in YouTube and merch, Google Merchandise Store. Now that comes up quite high, and there's a bit of a correlation there because that was your top performing keyword as well. And you can see the revenue here is pretty consistent with what we saw before. So this again helps you make decisions about how to manage and implement and maintain your Google Ads campaign for the best return on advertising spend and also return on investment. So we've finished the Google Ads section here. There's a lot more reports that we can go into and look, but this video won't be an exhaustive list to look into that. I've just showed you the main areas that you need to be aware of and how you can actually monitor the Google Ads performance, that you have linked your Google Ads campaigns to your Google Analytics dashboard. Going on, we're going to go in the Search Console, and this again, just like the Google Ads, you need to link your Google Search Console to your Google Analytics account, otherwise no data will be available. So if you haven't already got a Google Search Console account set up on your website, you need to also have that done as well. Just in a nutshell, Google Search Console is a really handy tool that you can put on your website, which will track the way that people use the Google search, organic search, to get to your website and all your landing pages and content pages within that. So it analyzes a lot of performance metrics, and it also will tell you about some pages that aren't performing very well. It all really comes down to your SEO representative on your Google Analytics account. It will tell you all that kind of data from Google SEO and how your pages are performing. So let's dive into it. We open up the Search Console here, we can see the landing pages. So that's pretty self-explanatory. When you type in a query into the Google search and you don't click so much on a Google ad, you click on one of the organic links that come up of your, when you click on one of the results that come up in your SERP or search engine results page. So these are some of the things that come through. You click on those links and they land you to, or they direct you into a landing page. And here's a reference of the landing page here. We can see them all listed here, and we can see the performance, the impressions, the clicks, and so forth. So again, some of the metrics are very familiar, and these haven't really brought any conversion rate. I might want to see if I can change it around. No, so Google search doesn't really help us out to make conversions on this website. You can see that the actual Google paid ads, the AdWords, or the Google ads, they're doing much better. Organic is not doing well, but this is kind of like abnormal in my experience. What I find is, particularly with e-commerce websites, you really need to analyze how effective your SEO is, and you do it with Google Search Console, because people who use organic search have a high purchase intent. They're looking for products on the web that they want to buy. They're looking for information. That's why they'll usually convert a lot easier than people who are coming from paid advertising or other channels as well. Referrals is also another strong one. The two strongest ones, I believe, are organic and also referrals. Referrals tends to have a higher conversion rate, but gets you a lot less traffic. Organic, usually, if your SEO is done right, will get you a lot of traffic and a pretty healthy conversion rate to your website as well. So moving along, we're going to go break down to some of the countries as well. So this kind of information, I feel it overlaps a little bit with the audiences report as well, because it's telling you a little bit of geography information. But this is all specifically about people using the organic Google search. So they're coming from the United States, and you can see the number of impressions, the clicks, and then you can see India, United Kingdom. So if you have a global brand and you're looking to see where people are coming in through different search engines in their localities, you can understand where they're coming from and the performance of the SEO and the organic search coming through. So furthermore, we go into devices, and this is obviously the same information, but using devices as the metric. So you can see organic searches and how they're performing on each device. You can see here the desktop performs the best, but this again, I don't think is normal for many websites. We tend to live in a world that is very mobile first. You'll most likely find that mobile is in the top position on your website. But many people are accessing Google Merchandise Store from a desktop because they're like you and me, they're digital marketers who want to use and get familiar with Google Analytics. So lastly, we'll go into queries as well. Now these are a bit like the keywords or the search phrases that we saw inside the Google Ads reports. So this is what people type into Google organic search when they're looking for content on the Google Merchandise Store. So we type in Chrome Dino, we can see it got lots of clicks and impressions, and the click-through rate wasn't really that high, but it got the most amount of impressions, but not so much high clicks in comparison. If we're looking at the click-through rate, we can see that these ones are performing quite high. YouTube merchandise, Google t-shirts, so they're very specific. So when they type this in and they find the page link, they click through on it, and we can see the average position of the search results is about 1.1. So when you've got ones that are like the 9th position or the 8th position, that's going to be hard to get a click-through rate because it's most common, and I think you've been there yourself. You'll click on the first 1, 2, 3 links of your search engine results, but you generally don't go any further. And if it's not even on the first page, you're not even going to get any clicks. Very rare to get people clicking on your website past that point. So you want to see the performance of that, and that'll give you an indicator of, how your SEO on your website's performing. Okay, so that's it for the acquisition reports. I know it hasn't been an exhaustive list. There's still lots of features and functionality within these reports that you can explore, but the main point of it is to understand how your digital marketing and your campaigns are running, and how you can also track the performance of your campaigns, what returns they're bringing forth, and also some of the profit margins that you're bringing through on your digital channels. So thanks for watching, and till next time, guys. Bye.